The forgotten throne there is a throne inside you, not a metaphor borrowed from some dusty book of poetry, not an abstraction meant to make you feel temporarily inspired. A real seat of power, one that governs the tides of your experience, the quality of your days, the substance of your relationships, the trajectory of your entire life. And here is the part that should shake you awake. You have been living as though that throne is empty. You have been walking through your days as if someone else, something else, sits upon it, deciding your fate, choosing your portion, handing you whatever crumbs it deems fit. But nobody sits there, nobody except you. And even that is only true when you remember to sit down. Let me tell you something that took me decades to understand. For years, I studied the great traditions of the world, the sacred texts, the mystical writings, the philosophical treatises that have shaped human civilization for millennia. And in every single one of them, buried beneath the rituals and the customs and the cultural dressings, I found the same irreducible truth. The human mind is not a passive receiver. It is a cause, not a secondary cause, not a contributing factor, the primary cause, the first mover in the architecture of individual experience. Now, you might hear that and think it sounds like something stitched onto a cushion at a gift shop. But sit with it for a moment. Really let it land. If your mind is the primary cause of what you experience, not your boss, not the economy, not your childhood, not the government, not the diagnosis, not the betrayal, then everything you have been blaming for the shape of your life is, at best, a secondary player, a supporting actor. A condition, yes, but never the cause. You know what most people do with that truth? They run from it. Because if you are the cause, then you are also responsible. And responsibility, my friends, is the one currency that the modern world teaches you to counterfeit. We live in an age that celebrates victimhood, that rewards the loudest complaint, that hands trophies to those who can most convincingly demonstrate that they had no choice. And I am not here to mock anyone's suffering. Suffering is real, pain is real, loss is real. But the question is never whether you have suffered. The question is whether your suffering has become your identity, whether you have confused the wound with the self. I remember a woman who came to see me many years ago. She was in her late 40s, well-dressed, intelligent, articulate. She sat across from me, and for the first 20 minutes, she told me everything that had been done to her. Her father had been cold and distant. Her first husband had been unfaithful. Her business partner had stolen from her. Her second marriage had ended in a slow, grinding silence. And as she spoke, her eyes were dry. She had told this story so many times that it had become rehearsed, polished even. It was a performance of victimhood so well crafted that she did not even realize she was performing. When she finished, I asked her a single question. I said, "And what have you done?" She looked at me as though I had spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean?" she said. I said, "You have told me what your father did, what your husband did, what your partner did, but you have not told me a single thing that you did. What did you decide? What did you choose? What did you imagine for yourself, and how did you hold that image in your mind?" She was quiet for a long time. And then she said something that I have never forgotten. She said, "No one has ever asked me that before." Think about that. A woman of nearly 50 years, and no one, not a therapist, not a friend, not a counselor, had ever asked her what she had caused. They had only ever asked her what she had endured. That is the crisis of our time. We have become a civilization of endurers. We endure our jobs. We endure our relationships. We endure our health. We endure our financial reality, and we call that living. But endurance is not sovereignty. Endurance is the posture of the subject, not the king. And you were not built to be a subject in your own life. The throne is there. It has always been there. The question is not whether you deserve to sit upon it. That question is beneath you. The question is whether you are willing to stop pretending that someone else should be sitting there instead. Because every time you say, I can't help it, every time you say, that's just how things are, every time you say, it's not up to me, you are abdicating. You are stepping down from the seat of causation and handing the scepter to circumstance. And circumstance, let me tell you, is a terrible ruler. It has no vision. It has no love for you. It simply is. So before we go any further, I need you to understand what we are doing here. We are not having a motivational chat. We are not sprinkling positive thinking over the surface of your life like sugar on a bitter pill. We are reclaiming something. Something ancient, something fundamental, something that has been yours since the moment consciousness first flickered to life behind your eye. We are reclaiming your position as the primary cause of your experience. And once you truly understand what that means, not intellectually, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing reality that you inhabit every waking moment, nothing in your world will ever be the same. The architecture of belief, every building you have ever walked into began as a thought, not a brick, not a blueprint, a thought. Someone somewhere imagined a structure that did not yet exist, and that imagination set into motion a chain of events, drawings, calculations, materials, labor, that eventually produced something solid enough to stand in the rain. Your life operates on the same principle, except the building materials are not steel and concrete. They are beliefs. And unlike a physical building, you cannot see your beliefs by looking at the walls. You can only see them by looking at the life they have constructed. Here is what I have discovered after a lifetime of studying the mechanics of the mind. You do not get what you want. You get what you believe. And these are almost never the same thing. A man may want wealth with every fiber of his being. He may dream about it, talk about it, work 18 hours a day for it. But if deep in the basement of his mind he believes that money is dirty, that rich people are selfish, that he does not deserve abundance, then his wanting is just noise. The subconscious mind, that vast and silent architect, is not listening to his wishes. It is listening to his beliefs, and it is building accordingly. Think of it this way. Your conscious mind, the part of you that is listening to me right now, the part that reasons, analyzes, debates, and decides, is the architect. It draws the plans. It says, I want this kind of life. I want health. I want love. I want prosperity. I want peace. Beautiful plans, inspiring plans. But the conscious mind does not build anything. It cannot. It is not equipped for construction. The building is done by the subconscious mind, that immense, tireless, literal-minded force that operates beneath the surface of your awareness 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without rest, without question, without judgment. And here is the part that changes everything. The subconscious does not evaluate your belief. It does not say, well, that belief is irrational, or that fear is unfounded, or that self-image is based on something your mother said when you were 7 and she was having a bad day. It simply accepts whatever is impressed upon it and goes to work, making it real. It is the most faithful servant in the universe, and it will build you a palace or a prison with equal efficiency, depending entirely on the instructions you give it. Now, most people have never given their subconscious a single deliberate instruction in their entire lives. Not one. They have been feeding it a steady diet of worry, anxiety, comparison, resentment, and fear, and then wondering why their life looks the way it does. That is like handing a builder a blueprint for a shack, and then being shocked when you do not end up with a mansion. I once counseled a young man, sharp, talented, the kind of person you would look at and think he has everything going for him. Good education, good health, good connections. But he could not hold a job for more than 6 months. Every position he took ended the same way. A conflict with a supervisor, a feeling of being undervalued, a dramatic exit. He came to me after his 5th such departure in 3 years, frustrated and bewildered. He said, "There must be something wrong with the world. Every boss I have is the same." I told him, "The world is a mirror. If every reflection looks the same, the problem is not the mirror." We began to explore his inner architecture, and what we found was a belief so deeply embedded that he had never even articulated it to himself. His father had been a domineering, critical man who had made him feel from earliest childhood that no authority figure could be trusted. That belief, unexamined, unquestioned, invisible, had been running his career like a hidden operating system. Every boss became his father. Every piece of feedback became criticism. Every professional relationship became a battlefield. Because the subconscious had been instructed decades ago that authority equals threat. When he understood this, when he truly saw it, the change was not gradual. It was immediate. Not because the external world shifted overnight, but because his internal architecture changed. He began to impress a new belief upon his subconscious, that authority could be collaborative, that feedback could be constructive, that he could be powerful without being in conflict. Within a year, he had held the same position longer than any previous one. Within 2 years, he had been promoted twice. You see, the subconscious does not know the difference between a belief you chose and a belief you inherit. It does not know the difference between something you decided to think and something you absorbed from the atmosphere of your childhood home. It simply builds, and it has been building your life, faithfully, precisely, without error, according to blueprints you may not even know you are carrying. So the first act of sovereignty is not action, it is awareness. You must become an archaeologist of your own mind. You must dig beneath the surface of your desires and find the beliefs that are actually running the show. Because until you know what you truly believe, not what you say you believe, not what you post on social media, not what you tell your friends at dinner, but what you believe in the silence of 3 in the morning when no one is watching and no one is listening, you cannot change a thing. The architect must see the old blueprints before he can draw new ones. The day I learned I was the cause, sometimes the most important lessons arrive wearing the disguise of the worst days of your life. That has certainly been my experience. And there was one day in particular, one ordinary, unremarkable day, that cracked open everything I thought I understood about the way life works. I was a young man then, living in a small room with very little money and even less certainty about what I was supposed to be doing with my life. I had been studying chemistry at a university because that is what practical young men did. They studied something useful, something that would lead to a respectable position and a steady income. But my heart was not in the laboratory. My heart was in a question that no beaker or formula could answer. Why do some people flourish while others, equally talented, equally hard-working, seem to run into invisible walls at every turn? I watched it happen around me constantly. 2 men would start in the same circumstances, same education, same opportunities, same city, same era. And within 10 years, one would be thriving and the other would be barely surviving. The conventional explanations never satisfied me. Luck? Perhaps, occasionally. But luck does not explain a pattern. Hard work? Both men worked hard. Connections? Both had them. There was something else operating beneath the surface, something that the textbooks did not address and the professors did not teach. Then one afternoon, quite by accident, I came across a small, worn book in a second-hand shop. It was a treatise on the power of the subconscious mind, written by a man whose name I no longer remember, in language so simple that I almost put it back on the shelf. But something made me open it, and the first line I read stopped me cold. It said, in essence, that every man is the architect of his own fortune, not through his actions alone, but through the habitual thinking of his deeper mind. Now, I had heard versions of that idea before. Think positive. Believe in yourself. The usual platitudes that people toss around like confetti without ever examining what they actually mean. But this book was different. It was specific. It described a mechanism. It said that the subconscious mind accepts any idea that is impressed upon it with feeling and repetition, and then works ceaselessly to bring that idea into material expression. Not sometimes, not for special people. As a law, as reliable as gravity. I was skeptical, deeply skeptical, but I was also desperate enough to try. At that time, I owed a small debt, not a large sum, but enough to cause real anxiety. I decided to test this law by impressing upon my subconscious the idea that the money would come through unexpected channels. Every night before sleep, I would close my eyes and imagine holding the exact sum in my hand. I would feel the relief of the debt being paid, letting that feeling soak into me until it became more real than the anxiety. For the first week, nothing happened. The debt remained. The anxiety remained. My rational mind said, you see, nonsense. But I persisted, because the book had warned that the conscious mind would resist, that doubt would arise, and that persistence through doubt was the entire test. On the 11th day, I received a letter. A relative whom I had not heard from in over 2 years had enclosed a sum of money, not as a loan, not as charity, but as repayment for a small favor I had done long ago and had completely forgotten. The amount was almost exactly what I owed. Now, I am not a naive man. I did not immediately conclude that my mental experiment had caused this letter to appear. Coincidences do happen. But I noticed something that I could not explain away. The feeling. The feeling I had cultivated in my imagination. The relief. The gratitude. The sense of a burden being lifted was identical to the feeling I experienced when I opened that envelope. It was as though my subconscious mind had been rehearsing an event that had not yet occurred. And when the event finally arrived, it fit the rehearsal perfectly. That was the day I stopped being a chemist and started being a student of the mind. Not because of one letter, not because of one coincidence, but because that experience opened a door. And once I walked through it, I found an entire world that I had been blind to. I began to study every tradition, every teacher, every scientific paper I could find on the relationship between thought and experience. And everywhere I looked, I found the same principle, stated in different languages but pointing to the same truth. Consciousness is not a byproduct of life. It is the cause of life. Your thoughts do not merely describe your reality. They prescribe it. That discovery did not make my life easy. Knowing the law does not exempt you from applying it. Understanding gravity does not mean you will never fall, but it means you understand why. And more importantly, you understand how to rise through the deliberate, sovereign use of the one power that has been yours from the beginning. And that is what I have spent every day since trying to share. Not a philosophy, not a religion, a demonstrable, repeatable, testable truth. You are the cause, not a cause, the cause. And the sooner you stop looking outside yourself for permission to believe that, the sooner your life will begin to reflect the magnitude of who you actually are. The tyranny of conditions. Have you ever noticed how easily we bow to conditions? How quickly we surrender our inner authority the moment circumstances turn unfavorable? A doctor delivers a diagnosis, And within seconds, the patient's entire self-concept reorganizes around that diagnosis. A bank balance drops below a certain number, and suddenly the person looking back at you in the mirror seems smaller, less capable, less worthy. A relationship ends, and an entire future, a future that existed only in imagination, collapses, taking your sense of possibility with it. This is what I call the tyranny of conditions, and it is the most widespread form of enslavement on the planet. Not because conditions are not real, they are real. The diagnosis is real. The bank balance is real. The empty chair at the dinner table is real. But here is what most people never grasp. Conditions are results. They are effects. They are the printout, not the program. And you cannot change a printout by arguing with the paper. You change it by going back to the source code. Let me say that differently, because this point is so important that I want it to land in the deepest part of your mind. Every condition you are currently experiencing, every single one, is the physical expression of a mental pattern. Your health is the body's interpretation of your dominant thoughts about yourself. Your financial situation is the material expression of your beliefs about abundance, worthiness, and possibility. Your relationships are mirrors reflecting back to you what you have accepted as true about love, about trust, about what you deserve. Now, does that mean that if you are ill, you caused your illness through bad thinking? That is a crude and cruel oversimplification, and I reject it. The mind-body connection is far more nuanced than that. What I am saying is something different and far more empowering. Regardless of how a condition arose, your response to that condition, the mental posture you adopt toward it, determines what happens next. The condition tells you where you are. Your mind determines where you go. I knew a man once, a businessman, very successful by the world's measurements, who lost everything in a financial collapse. Not some of it. Everything. His business, his investments, his home. He was left with nothing but the clothes he wore and the thoughts he carried. And here is what fascinated me. Within 3 years, he had rebuilt, not to his former level, beyond it. He was wealthier, healthier, and, this is the part that most people miss, happier than he had been before the collapse. When I asked him how he had done it, he did not talk about strategies or business plans or networking. He said something that I have carried with me ever since. He said, "When I lost everything on the outside, I discovered that nothing on the inside had changed. My mind was still my mind. My imagination was still my imagination. My ability to see possibilities where others saw only rubble, that was still intact. So I started there." That man understood something that most people never learn. Conditions do not create your state of mind. Your state of mind creates your condition. And yes, I know that sounds backward. I know it contradicts everything the world has taught you. The world says, get the right conditions, and then you will feel right. Get the job, then you will feel confident. Get the money, then you will feel secure. Get the relationship, then you will feel loved. But that is the great lie. That is the inversion that keeps billions of people trapped in a cycle of chasing external solutions to internal problems. The truth runs in the opposite direction. Feel the confidence first, in your imagination, in the inner theater of your mind, and the conditions that match that confidence will begin to appear. Feel the security first, and the resources that correspond to that feeling will find their way to you. Feel the love first, not as a fantasy, but as a deeply held conviction about your own worthiness, and watch how the quality of every relationship in your life begins to shift. You think that is magical thinking. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed that when you are in a genuinely good mood, not a forced smile, but a real deep-seated state of well-being, things tend to go your way? People are friendlier. Opportunities appear. Problems that seemed insurmountable yesterday suddenly have obvious solutions. And have you noticed the reverse? When you are in a dark, contracted, fearful state, the world seems to conspire against you. Traffic is worse. People are hostile. Nothing works. That is not coincidence. That is the law of correspondence at work. Your inner state is not a reaction to your outer world. Your outer world is a reflection of your inner state. And the moment you truly understand that, not as theory, but as lived experience, you become ungovernable. Not in the sense of rebellion, but in the sense of sovereignty. No condition can control you, because you understand that you are the one generating the conditions. You are the projector, not the screen. So let me ask you something directly, and I want you to be ruthlessly honest with yourself. What conditions are you currently bowing to? What circumstance have you accepted as the final word on what is possible for you? What diagnosis, what debt, what disappointment have you allowed to sit upon your throne and rule your inner kingdom? Name it. Look at it. And then understand this. It has no power that you have not given it. Every ounce of authority it holds over you is authority you surrendered. And what has been surrendered can be reclaimed. The subconscious cathedral, deep beneath the surface of your everyday awareness, there exists a realm so vast, so powerful, and so extraordinarily faithful that if you truly comprehended its nature, you would never feel helpless again. I have spent my entire career trying to help people understand this realm, and I have come to believe that it is the single most important subject a human being can study, more important than economics, more important than politics, more important than any science you can name. Because this realm, your subconscious mind, is the engine that drives every other aspect of your existence. Let me describe it to you in a way that I hope will stay with you. Imagine a cathedral, not a small parish church, but a cathedral of immense proportions, with vaulted ceilings that disappear into shadow and corridors that stretch beyond the reach of any torch. Now imagine that this cathedral is alive. It is made of living intelligence. Every wall responds to your voice. Every room reconfigures itself according to your instructions. Every corridor leads to a destination that you and only you have chosen, whether you chose it consciously or not. That is your subconscious mind. And here is what makes it the most remarkable phenomenon in the known universe. It does not argue. A business partner will argue with you, a spouse will argue with you, your own conscious mind will argue with you every day. But the subconscious, never. It takes whatever you give it, your fears, your convictions, your assumptions, your mental images, and it says, yes, I will make that real. It does not ask whether the instruction is wise. It does not ask whether you really meant it. It does not distinguish between a belief you chose and a belief you absorbed from a television screen at age 12. It simply builds. This is why I call it a cathedral and not merely a machine. A machine has no devotion. Your subconscious is devoted to you with a fidelity that would put the most loyal friend to shame. It works while you sleep. It works while you eat. It never takes a day off. It never complains. It takes whatever dominant impression you feed it, and it goes to work. But here is the crucial distinction that most people miss. The subconscious is not creative in the way the conscious mind is creative. It does not invent new ideas. It does not dream up possibilities. That is the job of the conscious mind, the architect, the visionary, the one who decides what should be built. The subconscious is the builder. It takes the vision and makes it material. And it does this through means that are often invisible to the conscious mind. It arranges coincidences. It creates impulses. It draws you towards certain people and away from others. It generates feelings that guide your decisions in ways you cannot always articulate. Have you ever had a hunch, a gut feeling that turned out to be right? That was your subconscious mind communicating with you. It had processed information that your conscious mind had missed. Subtle cues, patterns, connections. And it delivered its conclusion not as a logical argument, but as a feeling. Do not trust that person. Take this opportunity. Call that friend. You did not know why you felt it. You just felt it. And more often than not, when you followed it, you were glad you did. Now, if the subconscious mind is this powerful, then the question becomes urgent. What are you feeding it? Because most people, if they are honest, will admit that they have been feeding it garbage. They watch the news and feed it fear. They scroll through social media and feed it comparison. They rehearse old arguments and feed it resentment. They lie in bed imagining worst-case scenarios and feed it dread. And then they wonder why their life feels like it was designed by an enemy. It was not designed by an enemy. It was designed by the most devoted servant you will ever have, working with the materials you provided. If you gave it fear, it built you a fortress of anxiety. If you gave it resentment, it built you a prison of broken relationships. If you gave it self-doubt, it built you a ceiling so low that you cannot stand to your full height. Not out of malice, out of obedience. The subconscious does not judge your instructions, it fulfills them. So the revolution begins not with some dramatic external change, but with a quiet, interior decision. A decision to become deliberate about what you impress upon the deepest part of your mind. To stop being a passive consumer of mental content and to start being an active director of it. This is not thought control. I want to be very clear about that. Thought control is exhausting and ultimately futile. You cannot police every stray notion that drifts through your consciousness. What I am describing is something more like thought gardening. You cannot stop weeds from blowing into a garden, but you can decide which plants to water. You can decide which seeds to nurture. And over time, the garden takes on the character of your attention. The weeds may appear, but they are crowded out by the deliberate growth you have cultivated. Your subconscious cathedral is waiting. It has always been waiting. It stands ready to build whatever you ask of it, a life of extraordinary beauty, meaning, and purpose, or a life of quiet desperation and unfulfilled longing. The blueprints are in your hands. The builder is at your service. The only question that remains is this: what will you ask it to build? Knowing that the subconscious mind is powerful means nothing if you do not know how to speak to it. And this is where most people stumble. They learn the theory that the subconscious builds according to belief, and then they try to change their beliefs the way they would change a tire, mechanically, forcefully, through sheer willpower. They stand in front of the mirror and say, I am wealthy, I am confident, I am healthy, and nothing happens. Not because the principle is wrong, but because they are speaking the wrong language. The subconscious does not speak English. It does not speak any language in the conventional sense. The language of the subconscious is feeling. Not emotion in the dramatic sense, not rage or ecstasy or grief, but the quiet, steady feeling tone that underlies your experience, the sense of thing, the texture of your inner world. When you feel safe, your subconscious registers that safety and builds accordingly. When you feel threatened, it registers that and builds accordingly. It is not listening to your words. It is listening to your state. This is why affirmations by themselves so often fail. A person says, I am prosperous, but the feeling behind those words is desperation. The conscious mind says one thing. The feeling tone says another, and feeling wins every time. The subconscious hears the feeling, not the affirmation. So how do you change the feeling? How do you impress a new belief upon the subconscious in a language it can actually understand? Let me share with you the method that I have taught for decades, and that I have seen transform more lives than I can count. The gateway to the subconscious is the state between waking and sleeping. The drowsy state. That liminal zone where the conscious mind, with all its doubts and objections and logical protests, begins to relax its grip. In that state, and only in that state, the door to the subconscious swings open, and whatever you present to it passes through with minimal resistance. This is why the thoughts you hold as you fall asleep are so profoundly important. They are the last instructions you deliver to a builder who will work on them all through the night. Here is the practice, and I urge you to treat it not as a technique, but as a discipline. The way a musician treats practice, or an athlete treats training. Each night, as you lie in bed and begin to feel the edges of sleep approaching, construct a scene in your imagination. Not a vague wish, not a general hope, a specific scene that implies the fulfillment of your desire. If you desire health, see yourself doing something that only a healthy person could do. Running, dancing, climbing, playing with your grandchildren with effortless vitality. If you desire financial freedom, see yourself in a specific scenario that implies wealth. Perhaps examining a bank statement with a balance that makes you smile, or handing someone a generous gift without a moment of financial anxiety. The scene must be vivid. It must be sensory. You must see the colors. You must hear the sounds. You must feel the textures. And above all, this is the most critical element. You must feel the emotion that the scene would naturally produce, not the emotion of wanting it. The emotion of having it, the relief, the gratitude, the quiet, settled satisfaction of a desire fulfilled. Do not try to figure out how it will happen. That is not your job. Your job is the what and the feeling. The how belongs to the subconscious mind, which has access to resources, connections, and possibilities that your conscious mind cannot even conceive of. I remember a man who came to me with a desire that seemed, by any rational assessment, impossible. He wanted to be a university lecturer, but he had no advanced degree, no academic connections, and he was past the age when such transitions are considered feasible. He had been told by people whose opinions he respected that this dream was unrealistic, that he should be practical, that he should settle. I did not tell him whether his dream was realistic or unrealistic. That is not my province. What I told him was this: construct a scene. See yourself standing at a lectern, looking out at a room full of students. See their faces. Hear the scratch of pens on paper. Feel the satisfaction of sharing knowledge that genuinely helps people understand themselves better. Hold that scene every night as you fall asleep, and let the feeling of fulfillment saturate your subconscious. He did this faithfully for several months. He did not quit his job. He simply held the scene and the feeling. And then a series of events began to unfold that he could not have orchestrated. A casual conversation led to an introduction. The introduction led to an invitation to give a guest lecture. The department head mentioned an opening. Within 18 months of beginning the practice, he was standing behind that lectern, looking out at exactly the kind of room he had imagined. Did his imagination cause those events? That is the question everyone asks, and it is the wrong question. The right question is, would those events have unfolded if he had not been holding that image and feeling in his subconscious mind? The subconscious, once properly impressed, does not sit idle. It makes you alert to opportunities you would have missed. It generates impulses that guide you toward the right people and decisions. It turns you into a living magnet for conditions that match your inner conviction. This is the art of mental impression. It is not magic. It is not mysticism. It is the practical application of a law as natural and as predictable as any law of physics. And like any law, it does not care whether you believe in it. It operates regardless. The only question is whether you will use it deliberately or continue to let it operate by default. For most of my life, the word prayer carried a particular image. A person kneeling, head bowed, hands clasped, sending a petition upward to some distant deity who may or may not be listening. That image implies something I believe is fundamentally incorrect, that the power to answer prayer exists somewhere outside of you, in a being who must be persuaded or appeased before your request will be granted. What if prayer is not a petition? What if it is an operation? What if the act of prayer, properly understood, is not you asking some external force to intervene in your life, but you activating an internal force that has been waiting for your direction? That reframe from petition to operation is the difference between a life of hoping and a life of creating, and it is the foundation of everything I teach. When you pray, when you enter that quiet interior space and bring to mind the thing you desire, you are doing something very specific. You are selecting a mental image, charging it with feeling, and presenting it to your subconscious mind for execution. That is the entire mechanism. There is you, your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, and the law that connects them. The law is simple. Whatever is impressed upon the subconscious with conviction is expressed in the outer world as condition. Impressed and expressed. That is the whole circuit. And prayer, in its truest and most powerful form, is simply the act of completing that circuit deliberately. Now, why do most prayers seem to go unanswered? They prayed for healing and remained ill. They prayed for abundance and remained poor. And from that experience, they concluded either God does not exist or God does not care. Both conclusions are wrong. The prayers were answered perfectly. The problem is that the person was praying two prayers simultaneously. Here is what I mean. A woman prays for her son's recovery from illness. She closes her eyes and says, "Please let my son be well." But while her lips are forming those words, her mind is painting a picture of her son in a hospital bed, growing weaker. Her feelings are saturated with fear, with dread, with the anticipation of loss. So what has she actually impressed upon her subconscious? Not the image of her son well and whole and laughing, the image of her son suffering, the feeling of impending loss. And the subconscious, which responds to image and feeling, not to words, goes to work on the dominant impression. She was praying two prayers at once, the prayer of her lips and the prayer of her feeling. And the feeling won, because feeling always wins. The subconscious does not parse language. It receives images charged with emotion. And the image she was holding, unknowingly, unintentionally, was the very outcome she feared most. This is not cruelty. This is law. And like any law, once you understand it, you can work with it instead of against it. Sovereign prayer, the kind of prayer that actually produces results, requires a single unified impression. The image and the feeling must agree. You must see your son well. You must feel the joy of his recovery. You must inhabit that feeling so completely that, for the duration of the prayer, it becomes more real to you than the evidence of your senses. That is the hard part. It is extraordinarily difficult to feel something that contradicts what your eyes are showing you. When the bank account is empty, it is hard to feel abundant. When the body is in pain, it is hard to feel vital. But difficulty is not impossibility. And the bridge between what is and what shall be is always built in the invisible realm of feeling before it manifests in the visible realm of form. I taught this principle to a woman who had been diagnosed with a condition that her doctors described as chronic and progressive. They were good doctors, compassionate doctors, and they told her what they believed to be true based on their training and experience. But she came to me and said, "I want a different answer. Not denial. I am not denying the diagnosis. But I want to know if there is something in my own mind that I can activate." I told her what I am telling you now. Your subconscious mind runs the body. Every cell, every organ, every system operates under its direction. If you can impress upon your subconscious the image and feeling of wholeness, of vitality, of a body functioning at its highest capacity, you give it a new instruction. You are not fighting the diagnosis. You are not arguing with the doctors. You are going to the root, the mind that governs the body, and delivering a new blueprint. She practiced this with extraordinary discipline. Every night she would imagine herself gardening, with energy, with ease, with no limitation. She would feel the soil in her hands, the sun on her shoulders. She did this for months. And over time, her symptoms began to shift. Not overnight, but lawfully, in accordance with the principle that the body follows the mind, and the mind follows the dominant impression. Her doctors were surprised. They used words like unusual and unexpected, but there was nothing unusual about it. She had learned to pray properly, not with words aimed at the sky, but with images and feelings aimed at the deepest part of her own being. And that is what I want for every one of you. Not to abandon medical care, not to reject expert advice, but to understand that you have a mind, and that mind has a power, and that power responds to your direction. Prayer is not begging. Prayer is commanding, not in arrogance, but in authority. The authority that belongs to every conscious being who has discovered the law and resolved to use it. Now let me speak about the opposition. Because if you think the path to sovereignty is simply a matter of learning a technique and applying it mechanically, you are in for a rude awakening. There are forces arrayed against your sovereignty, and the most dangerous of them do not live in the external world. They live inside your own mind. Fear, doubt, the divided mind. These are the three assassins of every worthy dream that has ever been conceived by a human heart. And they are so effective precisely because they do not announce themselves. Fear does not walk up to you and say, "Hello, I am fear, and I am about to sabotage your best efforts." It disguises itself as common sense. It wears the mask of prudence. It whispers, in a voice that sounds remarkably like your own, "Be careful, be realistic, do not hope too much," because hope makes the fall harder. Have you heard that voice? Of course you have. Everyone has. It is the voice that speaks up the moment you dare to imagine something better for yourself. The moment you close your eyes and begin to construct that mental scene of the life you want, fear slips in through the side door and begins narrating an alternative scene, one filled with failure, humiliation, loss. And because fear carries a powerful emotional charge, it competes with your positive impression for dominance in the subconscious. Sometimes it wins. Doubt is fear's more sophisticated cousin. Where fear is crude and visceral, doubt is intellectual. It comes armed with reasons. It presents arguments. It says, "This cannot work because of A, B, and C. People like you do not achieve things like this. The odds are against you. The statistics are clear." Doubt sounds rational. It sounds mature. It sounds like the responsible adult in the room. And that is exactly why it is so lethal. Because when something sounds rational, you lower your defenses. You invite it in. You give it a seat at the table. And before you know it, doubt is not a guest in your mind. It is the host. But the most destructive enemy of all is what I call the divided mind. This is the state in which you simultaneously hold two contradictory beliefs and try to act on both of them. You believe you deserve abundance, and you believe you are unworthy. You believe you can heal, and you believe the diagnosis is final. You believe love is possible, and you believe you will always end up alone. The divided mind is not uncertain. It is at war with itself. And a house divided against itself cannot stand. That is not a platitude. That is an engineering principle. When the mind is divided, the subconscious receives contradictory instructions. Build the palace. No. Build the prison. Move forward. No. Retreat. Expand. No. Contract. And the result is exactly what you would expect. Paralysis. A life that spins its wheel. Forward motion followed immediately by backward motion, producing a net result of zero. The person works hard, tries everything, reads every book, attends every seminar, and remains exactly where they started. Not because they lacked effort, because their effort was being applied in opposite directions simultaneously. I once worked with a man who wanted to start a business. He was talented. He had a genuine idea, a real solution to a real problem. He had even saved the capital to begin. But every time he moved toward launching, something stopped him. A new worry, a new objection, a new reason to wait. He spent 3 years almost ready to start. 3 years of preparation that was really procrastination wearing a suit. When we explored what was happening beneath the surface, we found the division. On one hand, he genuinely believed in his ability and his idea. On the other hand, buried deep in his subconscious was his father's voice. The voice of a man who had started a business, failed, and spent the rest of his life warning his children against taking risks. Get a safe job. Do not overreach. The world punishes dreamers. That voice was not just a memory. It was a living belief operating beneath his awareness, contradicting his conscious intention with every move he made. The solution was not to argue with the voice. You cannot argue the subconscious into submission. The solution was to replace it with a new impression. Repetition, feeling, and the drowsy state before sleep. He began impressing upon his subconscious the image of himself running a successful enterprise. He saw clients thanking him. He felt the satisfaction of building something valuable. He held that image against the old voice the way you hold a candle against the dark, not fighting the darkness, but simply introducing light. Within months, the division began to heal. The old voice did not disappear entirely. Old impressions rarely do, but it lost its authority. It became background noise instead of the main broadcast. And the man launched his business, navigated the inevitable difficulties with a clarity he had never experienced before, and built something he was genuinely proud of. Fear, doubt, and division are not character flaws. They are the natural resistance that arises whenever a sovereign mind begins to reclaim its throne. A rocket uses most of its fuel in the first few minutes of flight, breaking free of gravity. Your mental journey follows the same pattern. The hardest part is the beginning, when old beliefs are fighting for survival and new ones are still taking root. But if you persist, the resistance will fade. And what remains will be the clean, clear, undivided power of a mind that knows exactly what it wants and refuses to contradict itself. Do not try to become fearless. That is neither possible nor desirable. Fear has a legitimate function. It protects you from genuine danger. What you want is to become sovereign over your fear, to feel it without obeying it, to hear doubt's arguments without being persuaded by them, to notice the division within yourself without allowing it to paralyze you. That is mastery, not the absence of these enemies, but the refusal to let them rule. Let me share with you the most radical discipline I have ever practiced. More radical than any meditation, more radical than any affirmation, any visualization, any prayer technique. It is the discipline of living from the end. And when I say radical, I mean it in the original sense of the word, from the Latin radix, meaning root. This discipline goes to the root of how reality is structured, and it asks you to do something that your rational mind will protest against with every fiber of its being, to live, think, and feel as though the thing you desire has already been accomplished. Not will be accomplished, not might be accomplished, has been accomplished, already, finished, done. The desire fulfilled, the goal reached, the prayer answered. You are being asked to take the feeling of the end, the satisfaction, the gratitude, the quiet knowing that comes after something has been achieved, and to make that feeling your starting point rather than your destination. This is counterintuitive in the extreme. Every instinct you have says that feelings of fulfillment should come after the fulfillment. First the achievement, then the satisfaction. First the evidence, then the belief. That is the order of the physical world. But you are not operating exclusively in the physical world. You are operating simultaneously in the world of mind and the world of matter. And in the world of mind, the order is reversed. The feeling comes first. The evidence follows. I know this is difficult. I know it because I struggled with it myself for years. How do you feel wealthy when the bills are piling up? How do you feel healthy when the body is sending signals of distress? How do you feel loved when you lie alone in an empty room? The answer is not to deny the current reality. Denial is fragile and ultimately destructive. The answer is to recognize that the current reality is a reflection of past mental states, not a prophecy of future ones. What you are living now is the delayed expression of what you once believed and felt. It is a photograph of a moment that has already passed in the inner world. And the new photograph, the new reality, is being developed right now in the dark room of your subconscious based on whatever you are impressing upon it at this moment. So when you live from the end, you are not ignoring the present. You are refusing to let the present dictate the future. You are saying, in effect, what I see around me is the fruit of yesterday's seeds. But I am planting new seeds today, and I will not mistake the old harvest for the eternal truth of what this garden can produce. Living from the end is not a passive exercise. It is not sitting in a room with your eyes closed, imagining a better life while doing nothing to create one. It is an active, dynamic state of being that transforms not only your inner world but your outer behavior. When you genuinely feel the reality of your fulfilled desire, your behavior changes automatically. You carry yourself differently. You speak differently. You make decisions differently. You are drawn to different opportunities and different people. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because you are aligning your actions with the person you have already become in the inner world. The outer world has simply not caught up yet, but it will. It must, because the outer is always a reflection of the inner. I want to tell you about a woman who applied this principle with extraordinary grace. She was a school teacher who longed to write, not as a hobby, but as a vocation. She wanted to publish a book that would help people, but she had no connections in publishing, no agent, no platform. She came to me not for practical advice about publishing, I am not a literary agent, but for guidance on aligning her inner world with her desire. I told her what I have told you. Live from the end. Do not live as a person who wants to write a book. Live as a person who has written a book. Feel the weight of it in your hands. Feel the satisfaction of holding the finished work. Read the acknowledgments page in your imagination. Feel the gratitude of a reader who tells you, "Your book changed my life. She took this seriously." Every evening she held that scene. Every morning she woke with the feeling of being a published author. And she also sat down and wrote, because living from the end does not excuse you from doing the work. It empowers the work with an energy and a direction that is impossible to generate from a state of longing and lack. The book took 2 years to complete. The path included rejections, revisions, and moments of doubt. But through it all, she returned to the feeling of completion, of contribution. And when the book was finally published, through a chain of introductions she could not have planned, she said something I have never forgotten. The moment I held the physical book in my hands, the feeling was familiar. I had already felt it 1,000 times. That is living from the end. Not a trick, not a hack, not a shortcut. A fundamental reorientation of your relationship with time and reality. You stop being a person who is waiting for life to grant your wish, and you become a person who has already received it and is simply watching the physical world align with what has already been decided in the invisible one. This is the final discipline, not because it is the last one chronologically, but because it contains all the others. If you can anchor yourself in the feeling of the fulfilled desire and refuse to be dislodged by present appearances, you have mastered living as the primary cause. You are no longer at the mercy of time, circumstance, or the opinions of others. We have traveled far together, you and I, from the forgotten throne to the cathedral of the subconscious, from the art of impression to the science of sovereign prayer, from the enemies within to the discipline of living from the end. And now we arrive at the final chapter. Not the end of the journey, but the true beginning. Because everything I have shared with you is preparation. Preparation for a single decisive act. The act that transforms knowledge into power, understanding into sovereignty, theory into lived experience. That act is this. You must crown yourself, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but in the deepest, most literal sense available to the human mind. You must take the throne that has been waiting for you since the day you were born, and you must refuse, from this moment forward, to ever abdicate it again. No one else can do this for you. No teacher, no guru, no author, not even me. I can show you the throne. I can tell you how it works. But the sitting, that sovereign act, belongs to you alone. And here is what the coronation looks like in practice. It looks like a decision. A decision that says, from this moment forward, I accept full responsibility for the contents of my mind. The thoughts I entertain, the images I hold, the feelings I cultivate, the beliefs I allow to take root in my subconscious, all of these are mine. They are my domain, my kingdom, and I will govern them accordingly. That does not mean you will never have a negative thought or feel afraid again. Of course you will. The coronation does not make you superhuman. It makes you sovereign. And sovereignty is not the absence of challenges. It is the presence of authority. The authority to choose your response. The authority to say to fear, I hear you and I choose otherwise. I have watched this coronation happen in hundreds of lives. Sometimes it is dramatic, a sudden, unmistakable shift in how a person carries themselves and engages with the world. But more often, it is quiet. It happens in a moment of private resolve, when a person who has been living as a subject finally decides to live as a sovereign. And the world, which was never the cause but only the mirror, begins to reflect the change. Let me tell you about one such coronation. A man in his 50s came to me after a lifetime of what he described as living for other people. He had built a career his parents approved of, married a woman his community expected, lived in a city he never chose. He was, by every external standard, successful. And he was miserable. When I asked him why he had not changed, his answer was immediate: because I do not have the right. A grown man believed he did not have the right to choose his own life. Not that he could not, that he should not. That some invisible authority, parents, tradition, expectation, had a higher claim on his life than he did. That is the sleeping king. That is the man on his knees before conditions that he has the power to change, but not the permission to change. The tragedy is that he did not have permission. He had never given it to himself. And no external authority ever would, because no external authority has the power to grant what is already inherently yours. What changed for that man was his understanding of where authority lives. He realized that the permission he was waiting for does not exist outside of him. There is no office that issues it, no form that grants it. The permission to live your own life is built into the architecture of consciousness itself. You are not requesting sovereignty. You are remembering it. And when he remembered, when that truth landed in his bones, the direction changed. The compass needle swung from "what am I supposed to do" to "what am I called to do?" And that shift, maintained consistently over time, transformed every dimension of his life. Not perfectly, but authentically. For the first time in 50 years, the life he was living was actually his. This is what awaits you on the other side of the coronation. Not a perfect life, not a life without struggle, but a life that is genuinely yours, shaped by your beliefs, directed by your imagination, powered by your feeling, and governed by your sovereign mind. A life in which conditions are servants, not masters. In which fear is an advisor, not a ruler. In which doubt is a question, not an answer. You came into this world with a mind of extraordinary power, capable of imagining what does not yet exist, and then bringing it into existence through the faithful action of the subconscious. That power has been with you every moment of your life. It was with you when you did not know it existed. It was with you when you used it against yourself. It was with you in your darkest hour and your finest moment alike. It never left. It cannot leave. It is not something you have. It is something you are. So here is my final word to you. You are the primary cause, not a contributing factor, not one influence among many. The primary cause of your experience, your reality, your world. The throne was never empty. You have been sitting on it all along. You simply forgot to open your eyes and look at the kingdom spread out before you. Open your eyes now. Look at what your beliefs have built. And if you do not like what you see, do not despair. Instead, do what any sovereign would do when surveying a kingdom in disrepair. Rebuild. With new blueprints. With new impressions. With the quiet conviction that the mind which created the old conditions is more than capable of creating new ones. The coronation is not a ceremony. It is a choice that you make every morning when you wake, every evening when you sleep, and in every unguarded moment in between. Choose well, choose deliberately, choose as the sovereign you have always been. Your mind is not a passenger in this life. It is the driver. It is the road. It is the destination. And it has been waiting patiently, faithfully, without judgment, for you to finally take the wheel. Take it now. There is a kingdom to build. And you, my friend, are the only one who can build it.